Welcome to Culture Corner, brought to you on first Thursdays in collaboration with the Jamaica Cultural Development Commission. And for this episode, we are going to be zoning in on Miss Lou's legacy, advocating for the Jamaican language. And just in case you missed the segment on the tribute to Miss Lou in 2023 with the Louise Bennett Coverley Primary, it's on the playlist. You can check that out. So if you're new to this space, I am Winsome Sharia Witter, founder and executive director for Serenity Resource Connector, and I have the awesome privilege of moderating, hosting these live forums on Thursdays at 8 p.m. And we are zoning in on culture for this particular one. All right. So if you're into culture, language, community development, you are in the right place. So stay tuned, share the link so others can join in and learn more. It's a period of learning, information sharing, and I'm sure there's going to be at least one thing you might not have known before you join this forum. And if you miss any of the details, not to worry, we have a in-depth recap on our blog at serenityresourceconnector.com, goes live each Monday. All right, so stay tuned. So joining me for this awesome discussion, Dr. Joseph T. Farquharson, who is the coordinator of the Jamaican Language Unit and the senior lecturer in linguistics in the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy at UA Mona. Welcome, Doc.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me.
All right, my pleasure. And as we do it in this space, we keep it engaging. If you have a question for Doc that you'd like to pose throughout the discussion, feel free to share it in the comments and share where you are connecting with us from, so we keep it engaging here. So Doc, let's start by looking at Miss Lou's legacy. In what ways did Miss Lou's work contribute to the preservation and promotion of the Jamaican language? Because Miss Lou was just so colorful with the language.
Yes. As you say that Miss Lou was colorful with the language, a lot of people think that Miss Lou knew the language better than everybody else. In the same way that a lot of English people think that Shakespeare knew English better than other English people. From a linguist perspective, these people don't know the language better than others. Native speakers of a language know their language well, know their language fully, but these people are skilled practitioners in specific use of the language. And so it's the skillful way in which they use language that, really gets us. So I don't think it's a case that Miss Lou knows Jamaican better than, somebody who lives in Chapelton, or somebody who lives in Delphi, or somebody who lives in Tivoli Gardens. But she, as a practitioner, was able to use the language in a very skillful way. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, of course, she was masterful at her use of the language. Sometimes I call her, Jamaica's Shakespeare. I don't know if I should refer to Shakespeare as England's Louise Bennett, but because Shakespeare came first. So it was that she had this creative knack for how to use the language to produce new and interesting things. I will say, though, that she had an understanding of differences in the language across the island. And so if you read her poetry, if you just take up, for example, Jamaica Labrish, and you look at the poems there, you hear different voices. And those different voices are not just, say, male versus female, or old person versus young person, urban versus rural, etc. But you get her using different forms. So in some poems, the persona will use da as the way of marking action in progress. So mida come, mida run, mida eat, mida go, etc., which was typical in the area where she was from. But then in other poems, she has de, so mida come, mida run, etc., which
Yes.
is where I am from, Western Jamaica. But then that da, probably a little before her time, started to change. We started to lose the d at the beginning, which left. So you would be familiar with mia come, mia,
Yes.
mia eat, etc. That used to be da. So the people who say ano, they used to say da, but they lost the d at the beginning. And so she had this understanding of the language throughout the island and the differences, the variations. And that understanding didn't come by chance. A lot of people don't know that Miss Lou studied the language. She studied the language by going out, hearing different people speak, writing it down. She worked right throughout the island. And as she moved around, she was listening to how people spoke. She was also reading the work of linguists like
Mm.
Frederick Cassidy, Beryl Bailey, Robert LePage, who were writing about the language at that time. She read their works, and so she had an understanding of the differences, the nuances, which added to her own store of knowledge, which she was gathering over the years. And a lot of people did not then and still do not understand Miss Lou as researcher. They know Miss Lou
Oh,
as performer. Right. I haven't
yes.
started to answer your question yet, which was about preservation and promotion.
Right.
How Miss Lou preserved the language is that she wrote it down, and writing preserves things, yes?
Right.
And so some of those things which would have existed in the language and then fallen away and become forgotten, because she wrote them down, we know, aha, there
Yes.
used to be this word. So I'll give you two examples which she used in a poem. Akibos and Boilivos. And I may be pronouncing it. It could be Akibus and Boilivus. I think one was meant to imitate Latin, that's Akibos, and the other one was meant to imitate French. Now, if you check the records, you don't really find these words used elsewhere. The Dictionary of the Jamaican Language, Dictionary of Jamaican English, edited by Frederick Cassidy and Robert LePage, published first in 1967, lists both words. So for Akibos, if memory serves me well, they have a quotation from a 1943 competition that the Gleaner ran, where they asked people to send in list of dialect words, so the words and their meanings, and they gave a prize to the best list. And so Akibos was on one of those lists, and the dictionary used that. Boilivos, we find only from Miss Lou from a 1942 work. But then her poem records those words now, which means that we have them on record that they
Yes.
existed at some point in time. And so, because she put so much of our culture and language to writing, she has preserved the culture. I don't think I have to say much on promotion, because that was a significant part of the work that she did.
Yes.
that she was writing in the language, but she was also doing active promotion of the language. So she has several poems about language, or which make mention of language. So there is Nolikotwang, there's Gapery, there is Dryfoot Boy, I think, and then there are her monologues, which were published eventually in Auntie Rochi Say. There's one on Jamaican language, Jamaican speech, which a lot of people know, where she said, if English derive, we derive too. Patois derive too.
Yes.
It's not that them derive and we corrupt. And so she promoted the language actively as ours, as uniquely ours, as something that our ancestors had developed and that was worthy of recognition, and that we shouldn't be ashamed of using it.
That is so right. But would you say that it's through her repeat performances that the perceptions of the Jamaican language would have changed locally as well as in the world at large? Or
I'd say
did it
yes.
take more?
I'd say yes, but it never comes so. She
Tell us
had
more.
no. If you listen to some of the things people say nowadays about Jamaican language, and we are in 2024, and we are
Yes.
talking about the 1940s and 1950s. In the 1940s and 50s, Jamaica is still a colony of Britain, and things British are seen as the pinnacle of culture. They are seen as the things that we should aspire to. And so you can just imagine the sort of opposition Miss Lou had at that point in time. First and foremost, when she started out, she said people were wondering, why would any intelligent young woman do this? Why would any intelligent young woman talk like this, using, this bad language, this bad talk? She had to overcome that perception. Next, they didn't recognize her as a poet and a creative writer. So she said people thought she just got up and said these things off the top of her head. That like she was a stand-up comedian. As opposed to thinking, no, like any other poet, she had to sit down and think about her metrical pattern, her rhyme scheme. She had to think about the scenario, who the characters would be in the poem, what words to use, and so on. It took a lot of work. But many people didn't recognize that because they didn't associate the Jamaican language with serious work. Which is why Mervyn Morris's contribution is absolutely important. In the 1960s, Mervyn Morris, I believe it's the 1960s, wrote an article which was published in the Gleaner, titled "On Reading Louise Bennett Seriously." Because before, a lot of people thought, this was just something, you listen it and you kya, and that was it. And he said, no, this is serious poetry. Serious in the sense that this was a serious and important body of work. Plus, she was dealing with serious issues. She may have chosen comedy as the vehicle, but she was dealing with real life issues that her people were dealing with. And how she came to that is because, like most people of the time, and probably even today, when she was introduced to poetry in school, she was introduced, of course, to English poets, to Byron and Milton and Shakespeare and so on. And then she thought to herself, but okay, that's fine. That's beautiful poetry. But this isn't how my people sound. This is not how we talk. And if you go back to, say, um, interviews she has done and the biography written by Mervyn Morris. She says she was on the bus, or was it the tram, one evening, and she heard some market women talking, and how things were set up then. The back seats were generally reserved for market people, for the sellers and so on, because they had their baskets and so on. And there was no seat further up in the bus. So she was heading to a space down in what was considered the market people section. And this market woman became defensive and said to her friend, "Spread out yourself, ya Liza, one dress woman a come." And look like said she see the little space between we and want squeeze herself in there. And she said there was so much poetry and beauty to the language. And it dawned on her that is how she should be writing, using the language of the people. It took a while. It was a lot of struggle on her part. Other people joined in the struggle over the years. The linguists I mentioned before, linguists at UE, like Pauline Christie, Velma Pollard, later on Hubert Devonish, Catherine Shields Brodbar, um, other people like Caroline Cooper, who was over in Literatures in English, Mervyn Morris, etc. Rex Netterford joined in that struggle to get Jamaican people to understand that the way they spoke was a language and that there was nothing wrong with it.
Indeed. Let me greet Dr. Lavelle. Thank you so much for tuning in. Always great to have you joining us in this space. All right, so if you're just joining us, we just got a little background on the legacy of Miss Lou. Now we are taking it to the current linguistic landscape, because although Miss Lou and others have paved the way, we still have some way to go before the language is actually officially accepted and embraced, as you would have alluded to earlier. But are there any significant changes in its status or usage compared to the past?
Oh, a lot. We have made a lot of progress. We have done huge leaps. The problem is that because we are in the middle of it, we don't recognize. You know, it's just like growing older. If you get up every day and you look in the mirror, you think you're looking at the same person. Yeah?
Right.
But if you go back and look at your pictures from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you realize that, hold on, that's a different person I'm looking at. And I think that's the language struggle in Jamaica. So when we look back, we realize that we are not where we were before. A lot has happened since. So since the time of Miss Lou, we have had children's programs on television. You know, Miss Lou had Ring Ding. When I was growing up, there were children's programs on television, at the time JBC, which used the language. We have had, of course, our musicians starting in about the late 1960s, but more so the early 1970s to mid 1970s. Reggae music started to incorporate more Jamaican language. So reggae started out stush. Reggae started out as an English-oriented genre. So if you listen to a lot of the early reggae songs, even, you know, Rocksteady. Rocksteady has held on to English, you know, for dear life. Reggae probably took its cue from Rocksteady and was English dominant. But from about the middle of the 1970s, things started to change, especially as more Rastafarian themes started to be introduced into the music. and of course Rastafari with their their perception of Africa as front and center, and the concept that we are sufficient, we are enough, we are kings and queens, we are royalty, and that the things we produce are the products of royalty. Things started to change. Also because of the Black Power movement in the 1960s. So a lot of things went into the changes that we have seen. So music started to take off, or language in the music started to take off, uh, which means that by the time you get to the late 1970s, the early 80s, and dance hall comes on the scene, we are looking at a predominantly Jamaican genre. So dancehall uses the Jamaican language mostly. Then we have people like Muta Baruka, Okonoro, with dub poetry. And dub poetry uses a lot of Jamaican. It tends to be a bilingual genre, shifting between the two languages. Mikey Smith, for example, using a lot of Jamaican in their works. And then you get people like there was comedies or sitcoms on television like Lime Tree Lane, Oliver at Large, yeah, which use the Jamaican language. What I'm trying to outline is how much the landscape has changed from people shouting at Miss Lou from in the audience, and that your mother sent you to school for, to the Jamaican language being used deliberately on television and radio.
Yes.
So, in let's say about 40 or so years ago, for radio programs, especially television, not television, for radio call-in programs, when people called in, they would feel constrained to try their best English, even
Yes.
if English tying them up, and the host not understanding them, and they're not understanding the host, but they're going to. Nowadays, people have absolutely no inhibitions, and they have very decent and intelligent conversations with hosts, radio hosts, in the Jamaican language. Then I wanted to mention creatives like Joan Andrea Hutchinson, who
Oh, yes.
continued that Louise Bennett tradition, but in her own style, and added to the body of written texts in the language. So, where are we now? In 2012, the Bible Society of the West Indies released the translation of the New Testament into the Jamaican language. If you had asked people 2 decades, 3 decades before that, if that was possible, people would have said, no, absolutely
Mhm.
not. And
That's
in
right.
fact, when the project was announced, people said, where that I go? Can't do that. So some people say them can't do it because, of course, they thought the language couldn't handle something like the Bible. And then other people say them nothing do it. So it should not be done because this is the word of God, and you're going to water it down, etc. And the Bible Society of the West Indies, working in tandem with various groups, including the Jamaican Language Unit at UA, produced an excellent translation of the scriptures. By the way, the translation wasn't done from English, it was done from the original languages, and
Okay.
yep, and it was tested in the community before it was finally published. And now it's become a well respected work, to the extent that the Jehovah's Witnesses use the Jamaican New Testament, and the Jehovah's Witnesses have congregations in Jamaica that use the Jamaican New Testament, but also have services that are entirely in Jamaican. Remember, we're talking about how
Wow.
far we have come.
Oh, yes. Very far.
Yeah. Before, people would have thought, a church definitely has to be in English. You're talking to God and so on. But with the New Testament in Jamaican and what the Jehovah's Witnesses have done, we have proven that the language doesn't, the only barrier that the language has is the barrier placed on it by its speakers. If its speakers think that it should be used to do X, they are going to make it do X.
That's right. And we pause for a moment to recognize our blessings are our. And we have joining us from Guantanamo in Cuba. Let me say, bienvenida. It's great to have you. Thank you so much for tuning in. All right, so we are talking about Miss Lou's legacy, and we are going to be transitioning into the work that's been going into advocating for the Jamaican language. All right, and that's your baby, Dr. Farquharson.
Yes, it is.
Yes, so tell us in terms of your advocacy for the Jamaican language, what are the key arguments and benefits you see in this recognition? Someone might be wondering, why would we want to make it our language?
All right. Since you use the parent metaphor, I have to point out that I am probably stepfather, or at least I am the person to which the jacket was assigned. But there were lots of parents, probably foster parents, before me. And so this is work. This is a child I took up that had been cared for by many people before me. Many of those names that I mentioned before. And I have to recognize that because all of those steps, all of the contributions are responsible for where we are today. So Miss Lou's decision to write in the language of the people gave us an extensive body of knowledge written in the Jamaican language. And she had that record probably until the New Testament was translated. I think the New Testament might be a bit longer than if we put all of her poems together. But seeing the language on the page helped us to realize that this thing could be written. Because remember, for decades, people said, "Oh, Patois is a spoken language." I said, "But Miss Lua write it for how long?" So it's not just a spoken language. Like English, like Spanish, like Polish, like Swahili, etc., people speak it, but they also write it.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that was a significant part of her contribution. So it's not just in advocating and saying this is a good language, but what she was actually doing in writing it down made us realize that this thing could be written. Yes? So where are we now? In about 2001, Professor Hubert Devonish made a presentation to a joint select committee of Parliament, which at the time was looking at the revision of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And that submission asked the committee to include in the Charter provision for freedom from discrimination on the grounds of language. So you get it for religion, for race, for ethnicity, and gender, and so on. But language wasn't included. And many people might say, why would you do that? I mean, all of us talk Patois and all of us talk English. Neither of those two statements is true. I know all of we talk Patois, Most of us do.
True.
And all of we talk English. Some of us
Some
do.
of us.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I've had instances where I've seen breakdown in communication. So somebody talking, one Jamaican talking to another Jamaican in English for what I would consider very basic stuff, and the person not understanding at all. Then it is said to the person in Jamaican, and they say, "Oh, that you mean?"
That's, that's right.
So we overestimate how much people understand. And what I want the audience to focus on are the implications of that lack of understanding. Because remember that all of the arms of the state, education, healthcare, the justice system, operate in English. And so,
Yes.
what happens when you have a person who only speaks the Jamaican language, or for whom the Jamaican language is their dominant code? They have issues. And we do have reports, we do have examples, let's say in healthcare, where the doctor will explain something to a patient in English, says to the patient, "Do you understand?" Patient say, "Yes, doctor." But as soon as the doctor turns her back, the patient says to the porter or the nurse, "What him say?" or "What she say?" Now, for those of us who operate well in both languages, we miss that because we think everybody is like us. But that's not true. Think too about the justice system, where language is the primary tool used to judge whether people are innocent or guilty. Think about people not understanding what's going on in the courtroom. So first they have to get a lawyer. That lawyer is speaking in language that sometimes not even I can understand. But then the person doesn't even have a good sense of the kind of defense that is being mounted on their behalf. Yeah? So it's really a serious issue. And what that submission by Professor Devnish pointed out was that it was also a human rights issue. It's a rights issue that in Jamaica, many of our citizens are denied the right to fully participate in the society because the language that the state chooses to correspond with them in is not the language that they operate in best. So they're paying taxes, they're doing other stuff, but they can't fully access the services of the state. The committee, the Joint Select Committee thought, oh, yeah, we hadn't considered that, but it makes sense. They didn't think the country was at the place where they were ready to do that, but asked that a unit be set up at the university that would do the preparatory work, because we now needed a standard writing system. And that system needed to be promulgated, needed to be disseminated, made public and known. We also needed to understand better the structure of the language. And linguists have been doing work on that for a very long time. But we now needed to make that accessible to the rest of the population. Also needed to work out how to advise government and government agencies about what would be needed in order to implement this. And so the Jamaican Language Unit was set up coming out of that. and the Jamaican Language Unit did the work. We went for a writing system that Frederick Cassidy had created in the 1950s. It's what we call a phonemic system. Phonemic because it attempts to represent the sounds or phones of the language using as few letters as possible. So you see, English will use sometimes 3 letters to represent one sound.
Yes.
So you have the word through. The word through really has 3 sounds in it. It has th,
Yes.
it has r, and it has oo. But
Yes.
through has more letters than I can count. So what the system I'm talking about, which we call the Cassidy JLU system, is that it tries to minimize all of that variation and baggage and tries to have one letter, one sound. And anywhere you meet that letter is going to have the same sound. The example I give for English is, for example, the sound E. E. If you meet the sound E in see, I see you, it's spelled EE. If you
Yes.
meet it in I went out to see, it is spelled EA. In sees, as this thing is seizing, it's EI. You meet it in field and it's IE. You meet, yeah. So what this
Yes.
system does, it uses just one representation. Anywhere you come across the sound E is going to be represented with 2 eyes. What's the principle? If one eye met the sound E, then all you do, you add
Too
another
much
one
E.
so that it's lengthened. Yeah, that you hold it out. And interestingly enough, it's very easy for children to catch. So whereas, adults, especially for those people who have spent years in English, they have a warm time with it, children,
It's
in
right.
minutes, they have learned the system. You can't learn English spelling in a matter of minutes.
No.
Even today, some of us who have spent um, 15 or more years in formal schooling still can't spell in English. And the Cassidy JLU system can be used, can be learned in a matter of minutes. Of course, you're going to need practice afterwards. Um, I'd just like to make a plug here because the Jamaican Language Unit was involved in the Bob Marley One Love movie.
Oh.
And it's the Cassidy JLU system that was used to train the main actors in the movie. So
Oh.
it was used to train Kingsley Benadier and also Lashana. For Lashana, it was a modified version of the system because representing Rita tended to use more English than Bob, and so it was a modified system for her, but it was used there. Kingsley and his dialect coach, so he had a dialect coach who taught him. I worked with the dialect coach, and so it was a chain. Um, both of them thought that this system was a godsend because it made their lives so much easier. And this is what we have been proposing that they use in the education system. And I think we got external evidence from there. If if people, and this is for Kingsley and for Brett Tyne, the dialect coach, if people who were not familiar with the Jamaican language before found it easy to read this writing system, can you imagine people who already speak it?
Indeed.
So all of the time that we spend in the classroom, you know, on writing, etc., would be minimized. And what we have proposed, I'm jumping all over the place here, is that children be introduced to literacy in their mother language first, which is how literacy is done in all of the big countries that we want to emulate. So children in Spain, they learn literacy in Spanish.
That's right.
Children in France, they learn literacy in French. And then when you come over to Jamaica, children go to school with the Jamaican language, but then they learn literacy in English. So they have this leap that they have to make, which children in England, children in France and Spain and so on do not have to make. And then we wonder about the results we see for PEP and for CSEC and for CAPE. Hello? Yeah? So I was saying it's a human rights issue at core. My colleague, Dr. Kadian Walters at the University of the West Indies, her PhD work looked at several organizations and the language of customer service. What she did, she had actors who would call companies, and they'd call one day using English, asking for service, and they'd call another day using the Jamaican language. And they got a different quality service. The actors, after a while, on their Jamaican language day, had to psych themselves up. Sometimes she had to give them pep talks because of how customer service agents dealt with them when they called in Jamaican. No, this is Jamaica, where the majority of us speak the language. If somebody calls requesting service and they speak Jamaican, why can't the person at the other end of the phone use the language? Certainly, when I go into business places, whether that's an insurance agency or KFC or Mothers, I may give my order in English, or I might ask for service in English. But then when that agent turns around and addresses their colleague,
It's translated.
I was like, then why can't they do that for the customer? So it's a language rights issue. Where we are now is that we have the Bible, well, we have the New Testament. Wycliffe Caribbean is now translating the Old Testament into Jamaican. They have done the book of Jonah. They have done the book of Ruth. They've completed Esther. They have pretty much finished the book of Genesis. They're working on completing Exodus and Numbers now. And so we're making significant progress. Very soon, we're going to have the whole Bible in Jamaican. And remember what I spoke about before, what came out of having just the New Testament, the work of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so on. Can you imagine when we have the entire Bible in Jamaican, what that will spark? Yeah? We're working on having competitions where people write, stories and poems, etc., completely in the language using the Cassie JLU writing system. And again, that will add to the literature of the language. But where are we now? We are at a point in the history of our nation where the National Standards Curriculum, which was implemented in 2018, has as one of its attainment targets in the earlier years that the children should be able to read and write in both languages. So it recognizes the two languages that we use in Jamaica, the two main languages, I should say, because we also have Jamaican Sign Language, we have Country Sign Language. That's a story for another day. But the
Yes.
major languages that we use, it says children must be able to read and write in both languages. We don't have full implementation as yet, although UE has a program practically finished that we have put together to help the ministry to fully implement its own curriculum. Also,
Fantastic.
we are at a point in our history where the government has made numerous pronouncements on the value of the language to the nation. In fact, in 2019, the Prime Minister himself said that the institutionalization of the language was inevitable. What was he saying? It'll come.
It is just a matter of time, right?
Just a matter of time.
Yes.
And then I believe it may have been last year that the leader of the opposition said that if his party were to form the next government, then they would take steps towards the officialization of the language and its use in education. So we're getting there. We are getting there.
Awesome work. Awesome work going on there. So we are seeing we're making the language official is with impact education, government, and just about every aspect of our lives. And we're
Health.
seeing on social media where we have so many people who are utilizing the language to actually translate in terms of the culture. So there are other people from different culture, they're able to get a real taste of what the Jamaican culture is like through the dialect. And I've seen too where even in church, when the Bible is read in patois, a lot of people connect with it more than when it's done in English, because that's really how they speak. And they're able to actually understand what was happening at the time when it's done in Jamaican dialect. It's
And
going to
that's
take a little getting used to because we're used to saying patois and all of that, but we'll get there.
we'll get there. I consider myself to be high functioning in English. And you have people out there say, oh, you make it in English, and now you want to, you don't want other people to learn English. No linguist has ever proposed that Jamaicans should only speak Jamaican. Linguists have always proposed and promoted bilingualism. Yes, I am high functioning in English. But it was working along with Wycliffe Caribbean on the Old Testament that I realized that I didn't really understand some of the passages and stories in the Bible. I understood them on a shallow level, but it wasn't until I read the Jamaican version that I said, oh, wow, that's what this meant. Listen, I have a PhD for which I had to produce a thesis in English. And if that was my reaction, can you imagine people out there who are not at the same level as me? Yeah?
Yes.
So it's going to shift the paradigm. Also, for a very long time, the narrative has been the Jamaican language as burden, or it's almost seen as a tumor a cancerous tumor that you need to cut out and discard for the body to be healthy. Because many people have had that perspective, we miss the Jamaican language as opportunity. So there are lots of people out there who want to learn the language, especially people who are interested in Jamaican music. So there are artists in Poland, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in France, in Belgium, in Uganda, in Ghana, in Nigeria, Zimbabwe, who are making deliberate efforts to learn the language so that they can use it in their music. What does that mean? That presents an opportunity for us.
That's right.
As teachers, there are several Jamaicans on YouTube who teach the language, and they have huge followings.
Yes.
It means that there are opportunities there. But because some people have persisted with the narrative that this is bad, that nobody wants it, nobody outside of Jamaica, but that's not true. There's an attraction to Jamaican culture and Jamaican language, and we are missing out on the opportunities. Do you know why English is where it is today? It's not just because of colonialism that English people spread their language through imperialist expansion, and then that continued with the USA and their military and economic power throughout the world. It wasn't only because of that, but because English people in about the 1950s took the decision to deliberately spread their language through the British Council. And so they didn't just say, oh, people want to learn English. They made sure that people wanted to learn it. And they went about creating the resources for people to learn it. The textbooks, the international examinations, all of the instructional aids and so on. It meant that they also needed teachers. They needed dictionaries. They needed test setters. They needed markers. And so they created an entire industry out of their language. And my question to people has always been, if English people can do that with their language, which a couple centuries ago, nobody really wanted to learn. In Europe, if you were educated, if you were cultured, English was not the language that you wanted to learn. You would go for Latin or French, at one point in time, Russian. And now all of us are going after English. Why? Because English people believed in themselves, believed in their culture, and started to push their culture and language, and it created opportunities for English people. My hope is that we can do the same for our language.
Right. And this is a great point to answer Pristine. I hope I got your pronunciation of your name correctly. It's a question. It said, big up, we just joined good content. What is or who is preventing it from being an official language?
I'd say there are quite a few factors. So the political will is inching in the right direction, but of course there has to be the actual work. Yes. Last year, the Jamaican Language Unit did a presentation before the Constitutional Reform Committee that's considering the Road to Republic status. And the Jamaican Language Unit was invited which means that the committee saw the need to address the language question in the republic. So, what role will language play in this new republic? Now, we have all the other symbols, we have the Dr. Bird, we have the song, we have the pledge, we have the flag, we have the food, and so on. Those are already taken. What will be the symbol of this new republic? And I think it's only one thing we have left that has not been recognized. And in fact,
Right.
it is the thing that Jamaicans everywhere use to recognize each other.
That's so true.
So it is the mark of nationhood for us. What's preventing us? It needs the political will, but it's also going to take actual work. So what we presented to the committee was that the Jamaican language be recognized as an official language. And you notice I'm stressing the an because some
Yes.
people will hear the official language. So we want the Jamaican language to be co-official with English. What does that mean? That English are go official and Jamaican are go official too. The two of
That's
them. But we also asked for the other languages used in the space to be recognized, not as official languages, but as important heritage languages. So like Jamaican Sign Language, Country Sign, Maroon Spirit Language, Comanche, etc., that all of those be recognized as forming part of the cultural artifacts, the intangible heritage of Jamaicans. Once that is done, then we'll have to do the important work of getting documents translated into the language so that people can access things in whatever language they prefer. We'll have to have broadcasts in the language. So when government is putting out information, it can't be like the COVID situation where the government only puts out about, what was the term again? Comorbidities.
comorbid.
Yeah.
And some of us were just seeing that word for the first time.
First time.
We have to go research, right?
But all of those public advisories would also have to be in the Jamaican language. Yes? Textbooks would need to be translated and so on. And I know people there will be thinking, oh, but that's a whole lot of money. And do we have the money for that?
Technology.
Look, can we afford it? My question is, can we afford the loss we're experiencing now by a large portion of the population not understanding their doctors, not understanding what's taking place in the courtroom, not understanding what's happening in the classroom, and people coming out as semi-literate? Can we continue to afford that? If the answer is no, then we have to change what we're doing. Yes? The Jamaican Language Unit ran a bilingual education project back in, well, it's almost going up to 2 decades now, or a decade and a half. And how that project was implemented on very little money is exactly the way that this could be implemented if the language becomes co-official with English. One, you're not going to wake up one morning and everything has changed. It will change in stages. So let's take, for example, the education system. You don't try to do all the grades at one time. You start with grade 1.
That's right.
Yes?
Hold that point, Doc. We are at the top of the hour, but we cannot close without these final three questions that I have here. But let me recognize the Louis Bennett Coverley Primary family who is in the space. I'm seeing Principal Taylor, Mrs. Grindley, our culture agent. I'm seeing Camellia Smith. Thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, my collaborating partner at the JCDC, Nevlin Williamson. Thanking you, Doc, for the information. And we have Christine indicating that the Jehovah's Witnesses here in New York are having success with people because they love the patois.
Okay. Yeah,
So
so
there you have it, the success story.
we are
Another.
sitting on gold, and we
Yes,
don't, what should I say, we don't know it, or we refuse to
refuse to act.
recognize, we
That's right.
refuse to accept that it's gold that we have.
That's right. All right. So that being said, I love to get the community involved. What roles can individuals and organizations play in this process of making the Jamaican language co-official with the English language?
So, if you're a business, you have to think about how you serve your clientele, how you correspond with people. Are you making people feel as if they're welcome? Are you using the language that they're most comfortable in? There are changes in that direction. So if you look at a lot of the ads now on television, if you listen to ads on radio, etc.,
Yes.
there is change. If you look at even print ads, you're seeing
Yes.
more Jamaican, or billboards and so on, more Jamaican being incorporated.
Yes.
So
JPS did an awesome job with that during the hurricane in
yes,
terms of
and they've been doing
communicating.
that for a while. They've been doing that for a while.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's about how you treat with your public, with your clientele. Also, we have to create spaces in which people are free to use the language. And I'm saying the language because it's generally just one of the languages that people don't feel free to use in particular places. Yes?
Yes.
They have to put their money where their mouth is. So they have to sponsor things. Do business spaces consider advertising when they're advertising positions, not just to ask for a good command of the English language, but also to ask for a good command of the Jamaican language? Because you need both to deal with your clientele. So you ask it. That helps to give the language more prestige. And I saw a job ad the other day which did include it. And I think it was some sort of, was it a survey company? And so people, the person definitely needed the language because they were going to be interacting with people out there. So the message is getting out.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Before we move on, Ms. Gridley's asking, sounds good, but who will be responsible for standardizing the language? You had indicated that's been done by. Could you just repeat so we can document that?
That's what the Jamaican Language Unit is for. So we have dealt with the matter of the writing system already. That's out of the way. We have dealt with selecting the particular variety and so on. That has largely been done because we had to make decisions for the translation of the New Testament and now the translation of the Old Testament. So, for example, for the New Testament and Old Testament, we decided to go with did as past tense. So throughout Jamaica, you find various markers for past tense. Some people use did, some people use when, some people use been, en, in, min, men, and so on. They decided to go with did because did is the more general form. Now, it doesn't mean that if you are a Wayne user, you can't use your Wayne. Yeah? But we have the good fortune that the people who use Wayne understand did. The
Good.
people who use did also understand Wayne and
And
min.
then,
In fact, I have a neighbor, lived beside her for about 10 or so years. And it's when I went to university and went back home that I realized, oh, she uses min or min as past marker. It didn't even register because I heard her and I understood her that she was using a past marker, but it didn't dawn on me that she was using a slightly different form than the one I use. So it's not such a big difference. So the Jamaican language unit is there. That's what we are for. So you can contact us if you have questions about standardization, if you have questions about how you can contribute to the movement, please contact us. There's a lot happening and we need more hands, we need more voices.
go ahead and share the contact info that you have there.
So if you want to get in touch with us, we have we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram. Our page is Broadcast Jamaican, and that Broadcast Jamaican is written in the Cassidy JLU writing system as BRAADKYAASJAMIEKAN. So it's spelled how it pronounced. So we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. I'm not sure we're using our Twitter account a lot these days. We're also on Threads. We have a channel on YouTube called Broadcast Jamaican, which has lots of material. It has stories, it has the news in Jamaican, it has seminars, interviews, discussions that we did. In fact, we have a discussion coming up between Professor Carolyn Cooper and Mr. Winston Barrett speaking about bilingual education. And that's coming up, I believe, 2 Mondays from now. I hope it's not next Monday. And it's 2 Mondays from now. Or you
Okay.
can write us at jlu@uwimona.edu.jm. jlu@uwimona.edu.jm.
All right. And if you missed any of that, replay or look out for the blog on Monday. Welcome, Dr. Grant. Blessings to you over there in New York. Christine is asking, how often do you have this program? We go live every Thursday at 8 p.m. So Culture Corner is on first Thursdays, but we look at other aspects of community development, including community safety and security, which is on second Thursday. So you want to tune in for that discussion. We're going to be talking about safety in education. We are back to school, so we want to focus on that. All right, another question here: will standardizing the language not limit its diversity and dynamism?
Good question, and I get that question a lot. Standardization can't stop language. Yeah, standardization can't stop language. Plus, standardization is not about what people do around their dining tables. It's not about what people do when them on the corner talking with them friend. Standardization is really about what form of the language you use in specific contexts. And in most cases, we're talking about formal contexts, like in education, in healthcare, in the justice system, and so on. But people are going to still talk to them friend. When you're in your car and you see a friend in a them car and you hail them, standardization doesn't cover that.
Right through the window, right?
Doesn't want to cover that. Yeah. So it won't affect the vibrancy of the language, its dynamism, because standardization is not trying to control what happens everywhere. It's just about what happens in a small set of contexts. Otherwise, you talk how you talk.
Okay, and we can't leave out our younger demographic. How can our younger generation become more involved in preserving and promoting the Jamaican language?
Okay. So I don't want the younger generation to preserve the language
All right.
because you only preserve things that are dead. Yeah, we just spoke about the vibrancy and the dynamism
Yes,
of the language. All we need is for young people to continue using the language. And my advice is that young people must now think about, based on the discussion we have had this evening, young
yes.
people must now figure out ways they can make money from the language, a FIDEM language. So how can it benefit its speakers? So this is not about preservation. This is about which book you're going to write so that people who are learning the language can read a story or read a novel in the language. This is about the textbook you prepare so that people learning the language have a guide to follow. It's about the dictionary you're going to make coming out of this. It's about the songs you are going to write in the language. And so much, there's so much to be done. So I don't want us to preserve it. Preserving is like embalming. We embalm dead people. The Jamaican language not dead. The Jamaican language is like our sprinters. It's like our high jumpers. It's like our long jumpers. It's like our discus
Or
throwers.
it's reaching
Yes, they are active. They are
higher
moving.
heights.
They are doing things. And so it's about what's the next step for the language? How do we move that into the courtroom so that those people who are being denied justice because of language can have full access? How do we
Great
move it
discourse.
into the healthcare system fully so that people who can't access healthcare fully because they're talking to a Cuban doctor who don't talk Jamaican, and so the doctor can't fully understand what they mean. And that's a serious issue. The example I normally use, if you go to the doctor and say you have a pain in your stomach, and the doctor gives you medication, for, let's say, your belly, not understanding that it's your chest
Just, yes,
problem. So that's
big
why it's important.
problem. Indeed. All right, we'll take this final question and then we wrap. Could you tell us more about your presentation to the Jamaica Republic Commission? I think we did that before, so I'm going to ask you to watch the replay for that aspect. But this second part, how did they receive your presentation and how seriously are they considering your proposal? You can take
Okay.
that.
Let
Right.
me permit me to mention that that presentation was put together with the help of Dr. Celia Blake, who is someone with a PhD in linguistics, but is also a lawyer. She's a lecturer in the Faculty of Law at UAE.
Okay.
Yeah, as well as Dr. Kadian Walters, whose work I spoke about before, and Professor Hubert Devenish. It was well received by the committee. I thought, I went in ready to do battle, but it was well received. Just that they said um, the road to republic has several stages, several phases, and the phase we are in now is not the phase for that. And so we have to wait until a later phase. But what they are allowing us, the preamble to the Constitution, the new Constitution, is being prepared. And they are committed to having the preamble in English and in the Jamaican language. And we're also hoping to get it in Jamaican Sign Language, in Country Sign, in Braille as well. So it was well received. It was very positive, just that the dream has been deferred for a little bit, hopefully.
Deferred but not denied. That's a good place to be. All right. What are your final thoughts, your final message to our viewers, those live and watching the replay? Final thoughts.
I'd say, and I think I have said this before, Afiweet. Miss Lou taught us to value it. We need to put on inflation on it. So she give it the value. We have to consider all the years that pass and all of the things what it used to do, and we need to put on the inflationary rate. And we now need to find ways of benefiting from the heritage that our ancestors have given to us. It's a product that is in demand out there. We have to find out in what ways do we monetize this thing. And so this move is not a move for the Jamaican Language Unit. It's not a move for the University of the West Indies or the University of Technology, which now has a course in Jamaica, teaching the Jamaican language, etc. We had one for years, but the University of Technology has put in a course. It's not just about us, but it's about how all Jamaicans, how all speakers of this thing can participate fully in their society and also benefit psychologically, socially, and economically from this thing.
Quite an eye-opener there. Thank you so much, Doc, for sharing with us. Really enriching discussion. And let me thank also our viewers who tuned in from New York, Guantanamo in Cuba, the Louis Benecoverly family, and others. We had Dr. Lavelle always with us out of Clarendon. And there are so many others. I saw you coming on. And for those who will be watching the replay or reading the blog, let me thank you for making it. Culture Corner here on Serenity Resource Connector. And remember, we go live every Thursday at 8 p.m. And we keep it community development focused, so be it culture, economics, local governance, community development, youth development, health care, education, early childhood. This is the space for that. So let me thank you all again. Let me see. All right. So we have to wrap at this time, Doc. I want to thank you once more and the team there at the Jamaican Language Unit at UWI Mona. Thank you for sharing with us. And we look forward to more engaging discussions, conversation as we progress into the next phase and stage of making the Jamaican language co-official with the English language.
And again, thanks for the invitation and for giving me the space to talk about something I'm extremely passionate about.
Indeed. And this is a great way to wrap. We thank Miss Lou for having known the English language so deeply and for her contribution to the Jamaican language. You are welcome, Christine. Thank you again for tuning in. Have yourself a fantastic rest of the night. See you next time.